we set off and we played through the first 10 minutes of every single Halo game co-op. And it was actually really interesting just to see the differences in pacing in those first 10 minutes across the board, as it's very obvious that some games take a very different approach than other popular titles in Halo. So to start things off, let's go at the bottom of the list and maybe work our way upwards. Halo 4's Spartan Ops. We weren't really sure if we were even going to include this in the video, but we thought, hey, it's in the Master Chief Collection. Spartan Ops was kind of not that popular back in the day, so let's take a look and see what this was all about. So to start things off, we get a really interesting blur rendered cutscene, which is quite interesting because most of Halo 4 actually was in-game engine cutscenes. There's just a couple of pre-rendered ones, but for Spartan Ops, it looks like they all were rendered ahead of time. Now, as far as this opening cutscene that introduces you to Spartan Ops, I have no idea what's going on. I mean, I get it, they're slowly starting to introduce us to the characters that will be present throughout Spartan Ops. We learn a little bit of the team of Majestic, and then all of a sudden, as you're starting to learn who Team Majestic is, you get dropped into the game and you're Fireteam Crimson. You're not even Fireteam Majestic, who the whole cutscene storyline seems to be about. I get it, they wanted to do a story that made Spartan Ops relevant, and then they also wanted you to feel like you were your own Spartan, and not the Spartans necessarily attached to a specific cutscene type thing, so they made you a different fire team. Nonetheless, after our first 4.5 minutes or so of this cutscene, we were dropped into the very first level of Spartan Ops, which we've talked about Spartan Ops before. We're not the biggest fans, but honestly, for just having to play only 10 minutes, it wasn't that bad as a demo of what Spartan Ops could be like. We got to drive around, blow some stuff up, and that was the end of that. There was definitely nothing super exciting to hook us in to want to play more Spartan Ops, and because of that, we're gonna just keep it down here at the bottom of our list and keep working upwards. This next one, though, might actually be a little bit of a surprise for you guys, but coming in last place as far as real full-on campaigns are concerned is actually Halo Reach. Now, in general, we're huge fans of Halo Reach's story. We think across the board, the pacing and the narrative is pretty good. It does take its time getting to the high points, and for Reach itself, that works fine. However, for the sake of this specific test, we're looking for the biggest and most hooking 10 minutes of action right out of the gate of Halo. What game leaves the best first impression right away? And Halo Reach is definitely a little slow when getting to the juicy parts. Starting things off, we're kind of just chilling, learning a little bit about Noble Team, introducing ourselves to the fam. It's all good. We get a lot of cutscene stuff going on, and then after we have our little opening prologue, we're off into a nice Falcon ride over the area that we'll be walking through. Now, this is one of the levels where our rule of making sure that we're going at an expected pace, or the pace that either Bungie or 343 expected players to go through when playing the level, is what we're going for here. So this section definitely is very slow if you're playing the way that it was originally intended, because not only do you have to kind of walk around with Noble Team, watch them look at a clue or something and then pass it around like it's a hot potato, but then you slowly make your walk across this field and you make your way around the building, and then you walk through the building with the rest of the team and you meet some insurrectionists or people, and you have to wait for George to talk to them and figure out what's going on. There's definitely hints something is going. It's really interesting, actually. It does start to build up suspension when you play at this pace, and that's something really cool that Halo Reach does. However, by the time we double timed it up the hill, we heard some rumbling of some sort of creature up in the attic or ceiling of the building, and we pushed around to finally have contact. We see the Covenant is on Reach for the first time, and the suspense is finally at this high point. We shoot a couple of the skirmishers and jackals through the window, and we push down the staircase, and 10 minutes is up. Yeah, so between the opening cutscenes, the cutscenes at the beginning of this level, and then just the slow pace that the game wants you to go through, you really don't get to any of the action in the first 10 minutes. And because of that, we're kind of stuck with Halo Reach not really having the most significant draw-in in the first 10 minutes. If this was based on a 15 or 30 minute period, it probably would have ranked a little bit higher, but we're sticking true to our 10-minute rule, and it's just kind of funny that Halo Reach got really unlucky. Okay, next was Halo 5 Guardians. This one's interesting because it does have another lengthy opening cutscene. We see Halsey kind of walking around, and she keeps a framed picture of Halo 2 Anniversary Miranda Keys in her room, which is interesting. This is obviously in this opening sequence before the events of Halo Reach maybe. And then we cut to Osiris, who's doing some mission or something, and they're talking about who's gonna pay for the drinks afterwards, and it looks like Buck's gonna get stuck picking up the tab or something. And then boom, they all jump out of a pelican, and we get this like real high intensity cutscene of just straight up action that obviously was planned to be used for marketing purposes to promote the game in commercials and whatnot. And it is pretty fun to watch. There is some cool action. It definitely is unlike anything we'd seen prior to Halo before this. It's the most advanced we've seen Spartans in combat in game before, but overall it's pretty cool to see, I guess. And then the game drops you right into some of the action in first person for like one whole second. And then from there, you're just kind of walking through some snow shooting at Prometheans, and that's about it. There's some soldiers. There's a lot of the little dog Prometheans running around. You kill them, you move up with the squad, you try not to get hit by random things. I think the biggest takeaway here is Halo 5 does the opposite of what Reach does. It just throws all this action at you out of the blue in that first 10 minutes. So much action that you're not even getting to play it though. You're just watching it in a cutscene. It would have been really cool if we were able to actually experience this awesome cutscene in maybe a first-person perspective, or feel like we were a part of it rather than just like watching this over-the-top action moment. And then the pacing slows down significantly when you actually do get to play as the Spartans. We'll give it that. It is a very attractive 10 minutes of high-speed intensity, but ultimately we think some of the other Halo games just did those first 10 minutes a little bit better. Okay, so don't hate us, but next on their list, moving up our tree of greatest 10 minutes of Halo, is Halo 3's introduction. Now, Halo 3 is really cool. It starts off with a really great monologue of Cortana, and we get to see this star, and it's actually not a star, it's a ship, and there's another ship, but it's not actually a ship, it's just Master Chief's body free falling from space, which is kind of cool. This whole sequence, we're down for. We like it quite a bit. It does slow down a little bit though in the whole cutscene process when Johnson goes to recover Master Chief, and we kind of have to wait a bit and wait for Master Chief to wake up and whatnot, and there's some cool dialogue. It's definitely not the highest intensity type action sequence we saw in Halo 5, but at least the narrative is moving along, and we get to see the Master Chief and also the Arbiter face off and finally meet each other for the first time, and nothing really happens. Just Master Chief holds his gold deagle, because that's the skin I had on at the time, right up to Arbiter. Also, we noticed this random Marine was holding a different assault rifle from the rest, and the reason that is because that's my skin I have on for my assault rifle, and Johnson takes the assault rifle from the Marine and hands it to Master Chief. That was kind of funny. And after that, we finally take control of the characters, and honestly, Sierra 117 is a really good introduction level. However, it does start a little bit slow, and since we're limited to just 10 minutes, we're kind of starting at the lower part of the crescendo of the actual level, and as we're walking through the grass with only a couple minutes left because of the lengthy opening cutscenes, and of course we're trying to move at the right pace that Halo 3 intended players to be at, we only were able to make it as far as the Banshees fast and low section before we ended up getting cut off and ran out of time. However, we did at least make it to the part where we're able to hear them scream Banshees fast and low. That's all that really matters. Honestly, I feel like I'm always going back and forth on how I feel about Halo 4. There's so many good things about the story of Halo 4. It's just shrouded in a lot of other things I'm not really a fan of with Halo 4. But those first 10 minutes of Halo 4 are actually pretty decent. We get this really interesting anecdotal story about the Master Chief, with Halsey mysteriously being interrogated. We see flashbacks to Master Chief as a kid. We see some cool cutscenes that pay homage to other moments in the Halo history books. And this opening sequence is really, really strong. Of course, it is a pre-rendered cutscene where the rest of Halo 4 doesn't have that, but it kind of helps hype up this homecoming for Halo, where this was the first time in a long time we got to finally play as the Master Chief again. And then after that introduction that isn't as relevant to the overall story, but still relevant to Master Chief's story is finished, then we cut over to see what's been happening on the Forward Unto Dawn, and we see this whole introduction with Cortana waking up the Master Chief, and then all of a sudden we're back and we're in Forward Unto Dawn, and we have to run through, and everything's shaking and blowing up, and something's going wrong. We don't know what's going on. We're climbing up a wall all of a sudden, dodging debris, and then an elite jumps out and attacks us. This is a pretty good hook for just 10 minutes of Halo. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get too far into the actual action and gameplay itself, which was a little bit disappointing. We kind of got to shoot a couple of grunts as they came through the airlock, and right around this section is where we ran out of time, but it still had a pretty good and strong introduction, and the gameplay felt a little bit more meaningful than something like maybe Halo 5 did in the opening. Then next on our list, this one was kind of one we were debating where to put it, but Halo Infinite comes in here. Now Halo Infinite kind of is difficult to judge because we don't know how long the introduction is going to be when co-op is implemented, but nonetheless, still, Halo Infinite has a very strong cinematic introduction across the board. Much like Halo 4, it has this great way of setting up the story for the game, kind of telling you what's going on, what to expect, and the state of Master Chief and everything else and why these stakes matter. However, these cutscenes end up filling up majority of the 10-minute time that we allotted ourselves for this challenge slash test. So because of that, we can't really rank Halo Infinite much higher because as far as gameplay is actually concerned, we only had a minute or so to really navigate the opening area of the first level. Enough to grapple hook once or twice and kill a couple grunts, and that's it. Had maybe that opening cutscene been shortened down a bit, and maybe with co-op, it'll be shortened down significantly like we see with some of the other Halo games, Infinite would have ranked a little bit higher. But for now, it's gonna have to be okay with being down here in 4th place. Now at this point, we're going into the top 3 Halo games that just knock it out of the park with their introduction to each game. Halo 3 ODST comes in at 3rd place on our list because honestly, I think up until Halo 3 ODST came out, there wasn't any single game that did a better job at establishing who each character was in a brief and simple cutscene that gives everyone a chance to have a little bit of dialogue, just so everyone knows at least some sort of starting point of what they can expect from each character or who they are and what their attitude is kind of like. We get an idea of what's going on Earth, and we start to see some plot elements that play a big role later on start to be established between Buck and Dare and the true meaning of their mission. Now mind you, in the original ODST, there was this text scroll, but this text scroll actually wasn't a part of the campaign. It was an introduction that played when you first booted up ODST. It runs for about a minute and a half or so, but it's not actually a part of the campaign in the original ODST. It was just like a menu text scroll that happened. However, in MCC, they included it as a separate cutscene that plays before everything, so we decided not to include it, but still made a note about how long it was just in case it becomes relevant in decision making later on. Nonetheless, after that opening cutscene is done, you get this really awesome ODST drop pod sequence where you don't really get to control anything, but you do experience it in the first person, and it's really badass. Then from there, you wake up 6 hours later in nighttime Mombasa, and you have no idea what's happened. You have to try to find your way out of your pod and kind of wander the streets for a little bit. Now, we did get lost, even though we've played this level so many times, so it sounds about accurate for most people's first time playing ODST. And we do have to dock it because so far everything was so strong throughout all of ODST. However, the reason we didn't put it higher on the list is this little tutorial section that's required to get the map and nav system working is just really tedious and just kind of tanks the fun pacing of this level. We're willing to overlook it to an extent, but it was worth noting that had this not have been a factor where we had to stop what we're doing for 45 seconds to a minute to scroll through the tutorial for the 100th time, it maybe would have been one rank higher than where it's at. Nonetheless, we continued and were able to push through into the building, make our way up 4 floors through this creepy ambiance, and find Dare's helmet, which just leaves Rookie with more questions. Then the beginning of the flashback happens. We see Buck's drop pod hit a building, bounce off, and we're out of time. Yeah, it was a pretty strong first 10 minutes, and this was the only one where we actually completed a level in the first 10-minute period. Okay, so now there's just 2 places left for the top 2. Obviously, when we talk about number 2, it'll become obvious what number 1 was, but bear with us. For 2nd place, Halo Combat Evolved actually swooped in and surprised us, as we were expecting this to be much lower on our pick list, but actually without having to do the tutorial because we were in co-op mode, this introduction with the Halo ring and just kind of dropping us in the middle of what's going on in the Pillar of Autumn was a risky play for a brand new IP, and one that definitely paid off in the long term, because it just left so much for the player's imagination to put together pieces of what this world is like, and that's something really cool. We learn learn about a Halo ring. We're on this ship. We know it's a big deal that Master Chief's being woken up. Cortana's introduced. Keyes is introduced. This dude gives us a gun that he thinks isn't loaded and is totally loaded in this 10-minute period too. There's explosions. Everyone's fighting. We're running. We actually got a good, decent chunk of combat in this 10-minute period. Combat Evolved does a great job at just putting you in the moment, explaining a little bit of the world real quick so you know kind of what's going on, and then just throws you at it, and you get to play the game a little bit. And that's something that was done really well in their 10-minute period. The balance was pretty great here too. But seriously, nothing can top the #1 pick, which was Halo 2, which honestly, its first 10 minutes just did such a great job at throwing us into the story, building out the world, having this cool juxtaposition between the Master Chief and the Arbiter, and then also still left us time to have some gameplay and get right into it right away. Now mind you, obviously since we're doing co-op, we didn't have to play through the armory, which is a little bit slower, and we did also choose to bypass the Halo 2 anniversary Halo 5 prologue thing that they added in, where it's all about Locke, that spoils kind of the story of Halo 2A if you've never played Halo 2. So we are bypassing that, but whether you're playing Halo 2 in old graphics or new graphics, both of these versions do a great job at just, once again, setting some things up, showing these different stories that are going to be playing a major role throughout Halo 2, comparing them a little bit, and then just throwing you into the action. And it's familiar action, but it does a lot of what Combat Evolved did right, and then just kind of builds upon that, and that's something we thought was really cool. And that's why we think Halo 2 is the best introductory 10 minutes of all time across Halo. Now I know this was kind of an interesting topic, but it was just something that we thought was kind of crazy enough to do a video, and it does make you look at these Halo games in a completely different light, which is really interesting. Now we do want to do more things like this, but maybe compare later parts of the Halo games. We still haven't figured out exactly how we want to do it, so if you have ideas, let us know in the comments down below. But for now, that's it for today. Make sure you subscribe and notifications on. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.